Hello and welcome to Books to Last, the podcast that invites readers to pick the only 5 books they may take with them when cast away to a mystery remote location. This episode is a bit of a blast from the past, as we revisit one of the very earliest episodes of the podcast that I recorded with bookseller Dan Bassett in autumn 2021. I wanted to revisit the episode in particular as it's got all of the fall vibes you could want for this time of year. It's an absolutely brilliant list of historical fiction picks. And I just had so much fun recording with Dan, then known as Dan the Man, though more contemporaneously known as AresBiblio, that I wanted to share it with you and any new listeners who might have missed it back then. Dan's updated socials and links are in the description, and I hope you enjoyed this very seasonal episode of Books to Last. Dan, welcome to Books Last podcast. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you for having me, Anne. I'm very well. How about yourself?
I am good, yeah. Taking a chill day today, trying to get ready for the week.
Oh, that's better than a chill pill. Have a whole chill day. That's better. Yeah.
Yeah. The weather's not been great here lately, so no outdoor adventures for us.
No. It looks like it's. I dare say a chill is in the air. I mean, people might fight me on that, but it's just like I'm an autumn child, so bring it on.
Oh, I love autumn. Autumn's my absolute favorite season. I need to start going out to coffee shops and getting all their specialty
3 words
beverages.
Pumpkin spice latte. Yes, I'm basic and I know it, but I love it. So,
I tried it for the first time last year. I'd never had one before.
What?
And my friend who is obsessed with them said, this is what you're going to do for me this year. You are going to go and try pumpkin spice latte. So I did. And I was like, you know what? I actually like them. I enjoy them.
Oh, I can't. You're so lucky. I wish I had that experience. So it's like when you've read a book for the first time, you want to read it again. You've had that fresh pumpkin spice latte experience.
Well, my go-to drink, because I'm a creature of habit ultimately, and my go-to drink with Starbucks is a white chocolate mocha because I just love it. So whenever I go there, I'm always kind of tempted to try something else, but I never quite get brave enough, and I always order that. So I was given the instruction, and I did try it, and I really enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting to, because usually the heavily spiced drinks aren't to my liking. But
I think it depends where you go. I mean, I don't know what Starbucks puts in it, but I'm not going to complain. But I've tried a few different ones, and it's just, I don't know, it just fuels me for the whole of the autumnal season. When they take it away, I cry.
Yeah, I'm like that around Christmas time when Costa take away all of their specialty hot chocolates, because
Really?
their orange hot chocolate is just amazing.
See, their orange one's good, but I think it's like a Black Forest one. I had one a few years ago. It just tasted like hot chocolate. I don't know whether the syrup was out or whatever, but I was just like, no, that's not for me.
There was an independent little coffee cart not far from where I live a few years ago, and they did a Black Forest hot chocolate that was just amazing, and it just tasted like Black Forest Gatto in hot chocolate form, and I've never seen it since, and it makes me very sad, but it was the best one I've ever had, and I've been able to find one.
See, that just makes it sound like you probably imagined it. So people are going to be like, yeah, I've never seen this cart around, but it was there. It's like, well, no one else has ever recorded it, so...
My friend and I went to this cart multiple times during this Christmas season. It was there.
Yeah, but was your friend imaginary? Is this friend actually real as well? Or is it just like, well, we've never seen this friend either, so...
Well, I mean, now that you mention it, maybe. Who knows?
Well, I mean, it's a bad area we're getting into, but it's one of those things. But I think an independent place can sometimes just kind of top or trump Starbucks, because 2 years ago I was working the Cheltenham Literature Festival, name drop there for book lovers, you'll know what that is. And every day me and my colleagues went to this really small, really quaint, cottagey kind of coffee shop. They fueled my whole 2 weeks there. Because it was just pumpkin spice latte, and it was just like, keep the receipts because I'm obviously not paying for them. But if you can find an independent one who does it better than Starbucks, yes, you are right to track them down.
Yes, I've tried a few different white chocolate mochas in different shops, but I've not. I think they're still my favorite. Although I do make one at home, which is pretty good. So that's a good substitute. But yeah, this has been Coffee Corner. Nice tangent for the.
Of course, that is how you start a book. That is how you start when you're going to talk about books. You talk about what you're going to be drinking with it.
Exactly. You've got to have a really good coffee on tap for thinking. That's the one thing I've missed over the last week. I really like reading in a coffee shop because it's just I feel socially pressured to actually read instead of messing about on my phone because I want to be.
Because you want to be perceived as like this person who's like, oh well, I took a good novel to the Barnes and Noble and I was there for hours. Although I did actually last time before lockdown, I went into a Starbucks. I actually left with the waiter's number. So that was, I got a good coffee and I also got a wait. Nothing ever happened from, one of those stories, but yeah, that's a bit cliche. It sounds like I was in a movie, but yeah, it was
It
good.
could happen, but something could happen. You never know. It could be the meet cute that, you tell for years to come.
Well,
So it's
this was
always
like
worth
3 years
giving a
ago,
try.
so believe me, it didn't happen, but there we go.
But it's worth taking the chance just in case it does turn
Get
into one of
yourself out
those.
there.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of what are you reading at the moment since we are a book podcast? Anything good?
So I actually just started reading a copy of a book called Black Drop by Leonora Nattrass, and it comes out by Viper Books in October. And it really is, it's very kind of gritty, and it opens with three men being hung on the gallows. And it's a bit of a spy thriller set in the 1700s, late 1700s, if my memory serves correctly. And I love, as you'll find out from the books I'm going to talk about, I love a good bit of historical fiction. And a author friend of mine, AJ West, who wrote The Spirit Engineer, he said to me the other day, he said, you should read it because it's really good. And he knows what he's doing with books because he's an awesome author. So I thought, give it a go. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
I've heard of The Spirit Engineer. It's got a very nice Goldsboro edition that has been...
Honestly, I read it about 2 months ago and I was quite lucky to be privy to an early reading copy of it. And whoever's thinking about pre-ordering it, or as you said, looking at the Goldsboro edition, it's a flawless novel. And bless him, a lot of people have been saying, because the main protagonist is quite an antagonist as well. I mean, William, because what AJ has done is he's taken this man from real history and fictionalized a bit of his life, and you really love to hate him. He's completely insane and he's completely deluded, but that's all the better for reading someone who's slightly unhinged rather than your usual protagonist who has their stuff together, because he really doesn't. But yes, if anyone's thinking of pre-ordering it, for goodness sake, do, because it's amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know a lot of our listeners enjoy a good morally grey character. No one wants someone who's boring, so I'm sure that I'll appeal to a lot of them. Well, I mean, I'm really glad that you're enjoying lots of great recommendations already. But we get to talk about a few more soon.
Yes.
For any listeners who don't know, the Bookslash podcast is the podcast that challenges book lovers to pick the only 5 books they can take with them when cast away forever to a mystery remote location. So the 5 books they couldn't possibly live without and could read over and over, or in some cases just the longest books because they want to be able to fill as much time as possible. As part of this, our guest also gets to pick their mystery remote location because we don't condemn everyone to the fate of a deserted island here. So Dan, what would be your mystery remote location?
Well, I'm glad that you said that. Obviously, we don't all have to end up on a desert island because, as I said off recording, I don't like summer much. I'm not a massive summer child. So I would say take me to a really remote alpine ski resort lodge somewhere, snow falling against the windows. I love the way that snow just kind of muffles everything around you. It's like this sounds awful, but it's a silencer on a gun, basically. So it kind of just muffles all sound, got a nice log fire burning, and it's just perfect reading weather. So just take me away, take my phone, take the internet, just give me my books, and I'll be happy there.
I love looking at snow. I don't like being in snow, but I always love how when you first get like the blanket of snow in winter and you look out of the window and just the world looks cleaner.
Yes, and it's so white. It's literally just like, it's so bright, and you're like, oh, is it sunshine? Look out there, and it's literally like snowfall. You go, oh no, it's just snow.
Yeah, I always, whenever I look into our sort of garden, as soon as all the snow melts away, I go, oh no, I wish the snow was back because it just looks so much tidier when it was all just covered in snow.
Oh, I see. So you just want it to white out your problems. You're just like,
yeah. It just covers everything up. Basically, it just blankets everything, and it just looks I don't know, clean. I
The
can't
OCD
describe
side
it.
is like, oh, it's just everything's neat. Like, you know, there could be a body underneath that snow, and she's like, do you know what? It's covered. Don't worry about it.
But it only looks like that for all of like half an hour before
A
everyone
day?
starts leaving the
Yeah.
house, and then
Yeah.
they're driving through it, and it all gets ruined after that.
Then it becomes slush and it's disgusting. So yeah, keep me in this alpine forest that this snow is just ethereal and it never melts. Just leave it there.
Yes, magic snow.
Yeah.
But I mean, the idea of a ski sort of ski mountain resort. I always like the idea of a ski holiday, but not because I want to actually ski. I would probably just sit by like log fires, reading,
I'd fully
drinking
break
hot
my legs.
chocolate.
My legs would be fully broken if someone said, "Do you want to go skiing?" I'd be like, "Do you know what? Leave me here with my book. I can look at you people, but no."
Yeah, it's the only reason I'd ever go on is like if my friends wanted to invite me to a ski holiday just so they could ski and then I would just read. I would be
Fine.
happy with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a new one for the podcast. So without further ado, what is the first book that we'll be taking to your alpine resort?
So the first book I've chosen is the actually original book that got me into historical fiction. So when I started working in my store about 3 years ago, I will be completely honest with listeners out there. I wasn't much of a reader before I started working for Waterstones, and my manager said to me, if you want to work here, you've got to be a book lover, because if you're going to be surrounded by books all day, you've got to look. Then I just thought, you know what, throw yourself in. And now I have shelf upon shelf upon shelf, and I never look back. So the first book I would bring to this cozy alpine cottage would be The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. Now, this book for me is just everything that I love about getting lost in a really good story where the characters feel really rounded. It's really atmospheric, and Laura's always described as the modern day Daphne du Maurier, but I've read some of Daphne du Maurier's stuff, and I would probably say, I mean, I might throw off a few people out there, but I could not get on with Rebecca at all. I was just
I was going to say that's high praise because she's well regarded.
She's well, because I mean, it's really funny though, because it's just like I have read some of her stuff, like Jamaica Inn I loved, but Rebecca I just didn't gel with. But when I read The Silent Companions, when I first picked it up at work, my colleague said to me, she said, read it, you'll love it. And now both of us are just like the biggest Laura Purcell fans, so it's kind of like a fan club we have going. It's just classic ghost story. It has really good Woman in Black vibes, but it has its own personality. And I think that's important when it comes to books in general. I mean, it's okay to compare authors, but these people have spent months, years writing this book, and I don't think it's fair to turn around and go, oh well, they're kind of like, they have their own style,
Yeah, I think it's difficult being compared to like classic authors as well. And I also think, I mean, it is high praise because they're obviously well regarded for a reason, but no one's to everyone's taste as well. So I mean, John Steinbeck's one example for me that I know people love John Steinbeck and he is well regarded for good reason, but I cannot read his books. Like I just can't. I have tried.
Yeah, same. I mean, as a bookseller, I have to grin a lot of the time when people go, these are a really good writer and blah blah blah, and people can like what they like. It's it's subjective, but there is I won't say the name, but there is a major author who's very much in the current field at the moment who I don't rate. I've tried to read their work and I've not got on with it, but but then people can say that about the books that I read.
Well, definitely. I think it's really subjective. And I mean, I always find when people say, they're not into reading or they just don't like books, it's like, no, you've just not found the right book or the right author or the right genre because it does exist out there. My husband very much was of the opinion that he didn't really like reading. He read a few books in sort of school because he had to, and he had some series that he really liked when he was younger. But he's found, his niche is like mystery and mainly sort of crime and murder mystery type things. He's sort of read all the Sherlock Holmes and he was getting into Agatha Christie and that sort of thing. He doesn't read a lot, but he loves things like that because he likes puzzles. So he likes to try and figure out the answer, see if he knows who it is. But yeah, definitely that. So The Silent Companions, is it a scary book or is it just
I would say it's very
thriller?
unsettling. It's very unsettling. So basically, a lot of the time when I am selling this to people at work, they kind of get put off of the idea if they think it's too scary. Because a lot of people who read, scary books love scary books, or or the other side of the spectrum is they can't stand them. You know, they hate
Yeah.
being creeped out. So when The Silent Companions was first released, the hardback was actually creepier than the paperback. So anyone who goes and Googles this or has a look in a bookstore, you'll see the paperback has a eye on the front of it, and it looks kind of, you know, it's quite creepy. The difference is, if you owned the hardback, if you open the very first page, there was a portrait of the woman underneath. So her eye would be looking at you. So it wouldn't just be a cutout of an eye, it was a whole portrait. And the best thing about this book is the main theme of the story is it's kind of, Laura has a brilliant way of making you think that it will be explainable in the end. Like so many kind of ghost stories where it's like, oh, it was a trick of the light, or oh, it was just, you know, someone, you know, playing with ideas. But Laura does keep an air of genuine kind of creepiness and making the vibe really unsettling through the whole thing. And I would say The Silent Companions is it's deliciously creepy, but it's not scary. There are a few points where you go, oh my gosh, but you won't ever, you know, you won't ever have sleepless nights, hopefully. But the one thing that I took away from this book is the way she kind of takes an idea of, basically the opening chapter is this poor protagonist is writing from a cell, trying to write down her, you know, her previous encounters of these quote unquote silent companions, and there's a doctor who just wants to kind of help her get over what's happened to her in the past. So she has to write down everything to do from when she first goes to this location where she finds these silent companions to the whole trauma of her now being in this locked cell. And that for me was kind of, it was a really creepy way to open the book, because you think, well, how the heck did she get here? And then she tells you.
Well, I very much like when you sort of start a book almost in the middle, so you kind of have to figure out what happened before, and then you find out what happened after, because it kind of draws you in immediately and it brings you into the action. I mean, equally, I like books that start at the beginning, but I do find those are more sort of slow burn, takes you a while to get into them, whereas when you are dropped into the middle of the action, you immediately have questions and has you sort of engaging with it. You said it was historical fiction. What sort of time period is it set in?
So the thing with the Silent Companions is it's kind of like they never kind of give you a clear definition of the actual year. I mean, I have the book in front of me right now, and I'm just going to run through it and see if it actually tells me. I mean, it probably does, and I'm just literally just not paying attention.
Well, it could be that it's just not as important, because sometimes with historical fiction, it's definitely the atmosphere you need more so than the actual dates.
So I would say, like, the opening chapter gives me a good clue because it says 1865, so there we go. And the best thing is it opens with the line, "I am not dead." That's awesome. So it's set in, so obviously, you know, set in the 1800s, and it basically, as you said, sometimes it's the whole concept of how creepy it is versus the actual time period. But I think with this story, because it's such a gorgeous slice of Victorian Gothic, they're as important as each other to what time frame it is because of people's perceptions, and also how unsettling Laura makes the whole thing.
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a baby when it comes to like horror, scary films, that kind of thing. I'm a little, just because it's one of those, I tend to find a lot of the I suppose, for want of a better word, like trigger warnings and things that I tend to want to avoid seem to be kind of very inextricably sort of mixed in with these like genres. So it's not to do with actually being scared, although I've watched many scary movies with my best friend, who absolutely adores them. She just loves horror movies, and we would watch a lot of them, and I can very much, even though I'm very, I'll jump very easily whilst watching it, as soon as it goes off, I can very much detach myself from the film, and it doesn't stay with me in the same way that weirdly it stays with my best friend who loves it.
See, that's a good thing, because I'm the opposite. I can watch a scary movie and be haunted by it for months. So yeah.
Well, I think there's just a lot of the time it just kind of, I just set it aside and that's fine. But because a lot of them tend to have themes of, I suppose, I think the biggest issue is usually like sexual violence or that sort of
Yeah.
thing. It's always kind of like mixed in there because that really sticks with me and that really does give me nightmares and that sort of thing. It's like, or it's sort of, that's one of the reasons I think I avoid it more often than not, because there's some amazing books that have come out recently that are in this genre that I really wanted to try, like, I mean, Mexican Gothic, for instance.
Yes.
That I really wanted to read, but because I've seen these sort of warnings around them, I'm like, oh, I just don't think I'm ready
I've read Mexican Gothic, and it's not that triggering, to be honest. It really isn't.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. I
Yeah.
mean, like, I was absolutely gutted just because it's the most gorgeous cover of I've
It's
seen in a really long time.
Quercus, the publisher, they did a fantastic job on it, but also they transferred it over to the paperback, which was great. Because my
Yes.
biggest bugbear,
They
and
always
any of my
change
colleagues
it.
will tell you, is when you have a gorgeous hardback, and we obviously we know why publishers do it, because they need to either rebrand it or they need to make it more mass market. But damn, there are some ugly paperback covers out there. That's all I'm going to say. When the hardback's been beautiful, then you get the paperback, and we just open it at work and go, "This isn't the same book, surely?" You know.
Yeah, it does it almost a disservice sometimes. So it's good
It
when
does,
it
yeah,
translates. It does when good when it translates over.
yeah.
But yeah, so a scary, well, not scary, a spooky ghost story, historical fiction to start off with. What is the second book that would be joining the Silent
So
Companions
the
on your
second book
list?
that will be joining the gorgeous Silent Companions is, now, guys, there's a theme here. I think I've chosen all historical fiction, but do I care? No.
We love a theme. We love a list with a theme.
Because that's basically that is my shtick. So anyone who comes into my store and is a bit lost for a book, they will always just come to me, and if it's historical fiction. So the second book is actually come to light again because there's actually a TV series being made about it at the moment, and it is The Confessions of Frannie Langton by Sarah Collins. Now, this released in 2019, so I had not been long in my store. I'd just come out of a hectic Christmas, and then I saw this on the horizon. I thought, this sounds really interesting. And obviously, people who Google the cover, etc., will see it's stunning. It's a fantastically plotted story about one woman who she starts off in a Jamaican plantation. So it is set again 1800s. So it actually opens again with the protagonist writing this confession. So this time she is actually writing from the Old Bailey because she's been accused of not just one murder, but perhaps more, and a lot more misdeeds along the way. And she wants people to know the actual truth of her life before everyone puts her on trial, and being a woman of colour in that time. And, you know, she starts her journey off on a Jamaican plantation, being owned by a family who she's with for several years, and she does obviously no one in. This would be the wrong word, but obviously none of them are her friends because she to them is an item. She is an object. But she becomes very close with the master of the household. Nothing in a kind of seedy way or sexual way. It's just he sees something in her that he doesn't see in anyone else. He knows she has more intelligence than people give her credit for, being a slave. I mean, yes, it's very kind of contrite because he is her owner, but he kind of gives her information that not a lot of people are privy to. So it starts off with her kind of telling you her earlier years on the plantation, and then due to an accident over there, she flees to London with her master, and she thinks that she should be staying with him. They can make a new life for themselves in London. And shortly after she arrives with him, she's kind of blindsided because he gifts her, again, a terrible word, because a human being should never be a gift, for goodness sake. Transfers ownership. That's the exact word, transfers. So he transfers ownership of her to someone else, and he just leaves. He just goes, right, you're now his property, not mine. And through certain events, I won't spoil anything, basically she is found in the bed of her mistress, and the mistress is dead. And she is accused because she may or may not start to have feelings for the mistress, because the mistress isn't respected in her household. A lot of women back then weren't. Women of a higher standing, they had one job, they had to birth a child, and then that was it. They were just kind of there. And it just takes Frannie through the real lows of her life, but then also the highs of people actually seeing her, again, this is awful, but seeing her as a human being. And the way Sarah Collins captures this one woman's struggle just to kind of be heard, and but the biggest thing that she does is she kind of does throw a curveball at you, where she says, okay, here's Frannie's confession, but then a few times through the book she laces in other people's point of views. So Frannie's dead fast that she's done nothing wrong, but then you hear from someone else momentarily and you think, oh, maybe she's not as innocent as she says she is.
It sounds really fascinating. It's a sort of interesting time period to sort of, to be in, and a very interesting and unique point of view within that time period. Is Sarah Collins a black woman herself, or is she?
She is indeed. So Sarah Collins is a gorgeous author. She's brilliant, and she's used her heritage and her history to really make a point of saying to people that, slavery has never been right, and it never will be. Any kind of slavery is just disgusting. It's abhorrent. It's just awful. And she gives Frannie this voice to kind of tell you that, there is so much more to history. And, it's like so many books that are historical fiction. This probably did happen to someone in real life. And
it almost definitely did.
Yes, yeah. It's fictionalized, because at one point Frannie ends up she works at something not too much akin to a bordello at one of her lowest parts, when she has no choice and she has nowhere to go. And it's just heartbreaking to know that, slavery is still unfortunately very live today. Not in the same capacity, thank goodness, but obviously it's still there. And Sarah really makes an excellent case of these things should not be forgotten. And the quotation for it, I'll probably get this wrong, but I remember the quotation when it first came out was men try to write themselves out of history, but women try to write themselves into it. Because women, even in today, are not, it's one of these things. It's like with slavery, it's kind of like women are not equal to men, which I still find disgusting, because I think women are, I will say it, probably better than men in so many ways. And
I'm biased, but I may agree.
Yeah, you can completely agree. But it's completely true. It's kind of like Sarah, she's proud of her heritage, she's proud of her roots, and this was a debut as well. So this, I keep saying to Sarah, because I speak to her every now and again, I'm like, please write something else. But because Frannie Langton got picked up for a TV series, which is obviously currently filming, she's been writing the scripts for that and been kind of co-writing.
It's amazing that she's been able to be involved with that, because so many authors get cut out of that adaptation process, and that usually is what leads to inadequate.
Inadequate's not the word. But that's very true, because I said to her when it was first announced, that's amazing that she's so involved with this. And I think it's important, because again, yes, it may, I don't watch a lot of TV, but I will watch this, because if it's anything as near as good as the book, it's going to be important television for sure.
Yes, definitely. The fact that it's a debut as well is also just really, really impressive.
It's astounding, yeah.
It's always really exciting when you have a new author come out with a really exciting debut. It just makes you really anticipate everything that comes afterwards.
Oh yeah, but there's a downside, because you're like, if they wrote more, and you're like, no.
Well, true. But it's like true. I suppose it's kind of like Harper Lee, for instance, famously, and in my mind still only wrote one book. I don't accept There's no. I don't set the
Just no,
second
just
one.
no.
It's
No.
because she had no say. It was but it was. I remember one of the key things about, I suppose, To Kill a Mockingbird was, I mean, it was the only book that she ever wrote, and sometimes
Yeah.
there's like power in that, but equally, there's a lot of authors who were either taken before their time, or they just
Yeah.
never write anything else, or they're never given the opportunity to write anything else. And it's almost kind of really, it's always really disappointing because you always want to know what stories would have come from the same mind. So hopefully she does write something else.
I think
Once the
she
TV
will.
show is on its way and got legs of its own.
It's got legs, but the thing is
Yeah.
though as well, I've gone through this with several people. It's kind of like sometimes authors on their second time around, I've spoken to so many authors who are scared of their follow-up book because if one comes out that is so revered and so loved, they're scared of it falling short.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it can happen. I've read a few where, I've had this discussion with many people where you think, oh, but they wrote this. And then you read their follow-up and you go, oh no.
Yeah,
So
I think you almost want the first few to, sometimes you want the first few to be lukewarm and then to build up. But I think, I mean, even in those, it's like we say, every book has its reader somewhere out there.
Of
To
course,
someone,
absolutely.
that book will be the perfect thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you say about women writing themselves into history as well. I've recently, very strangely, and I don't know where it's come from, but I've recently got really into QI, and they had a big...
Ooh, there's a lot of episodes of that, so strap yourself in.
So there was a big section, and I mean, Sandy Toksvig, I personally think is an incredibly underrated
she's awesome. She's awesome.
She is, yeah, she's just a genius. She's just amazing, and I just love her. And she was talking a lot about, she always mentions like these really obscure figures, and she was talking about a woman, so how many women have been written out of scientific discoveries, or their scientific discoveries have basically just been given to the next man who made them, even though they made them first,
which is just awful, just ugh.
Yeah, it's horrendous, but it's completely true that, I mean, so many women are forgotten from history because there's just because so society just sucks. Like, it's society,
it literally does. It society is the worst.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm loving the historical fiction theme for the list anyway. I don't think we've had a lot of historical fiction on the podcast, so it's really...
And then I come along and just demolish all of those things.
Well, it's a really great... We like variety and a nice change of pace. So what is the third book that would be joining Silent Companions and Confessions of Frannie Langton?
So the third book I've chosen is it's another debut. So I think looking at them, like most of them are like debuts that I've picked here, but I do not care. This one is another one that kind of pushed me further into the historical fiction genre, and I read this just when the hardback came out because it was just before my time at Waterstones when proofs were doing the rounds, and I wasn't that akin to what I am these days. So my third choice is The Familiars by Stacey Halls. And the biggest thing for me was I'm quite lucky to have met Stacey a few times. I met her for the first time at Cheltenham Literature Festival nearly 2 years ago, and it was so funny because I'm not kind of like, I don't fangirl around authors very often because not these days because I talk to them quite often. I'm actually, I won't say the names, but I'm actually in a private chat group on Instagram with two quite big authors, and we have Zoom calls every now and again. We just sit there with a glass of wine and talk about stuff.
Aww.
So it's just really nice because it's just kind of humanizes them a bit more. And when I was at Cheltenham Festival, I was lucky enough to see Stacey. She was in conversation with Diane Setterfield, and the whole time, apparently, I wasn't aware of this. I was just manically staring at Stacey, just like the biggest grin on my face, because everything that she was talking about, I was just like, this is incredible. And she was kind of going through The Familiars because, again, it's another debut, and she was there because the paperback had just released, and the talk finished, and I turned around to talk to one of my colleagues, and we're just like, oh my gosh, that was really good, blah, blah, blah. And then my colleague was literally just like, yeah, you need to turn around. I was just like, why? And she's like, just turn around. I turned around, and Stacey was literally like right next to me. And she was just like, I had to come down and say hello because you were just smiling at me the whole time. And she said, do you know how incredible that is for an author when they see someone so enamored with what they're talking about. And the first thing I said to her was not, "Oh, hello, nice to meet you," or, you know, "Oh, I'm a bit starstruck." I went,
Although
first of all,
it wouldn't be.
well, I literally just like, I turned around and went, she had the most gorgeous red velvet high-heeled shoes on, and I was just like, they are just, I mean, we were in a tent and it wasn't the nicest of days, and I was like, she's working it. And I just turned around and I was like, okay, first of all, your shoes are amazing. And then she was literally just like, yeah, they're my wedding shoes. And I was like, you should have just gone full insane bride and just wore the wedding dress instead. Do you know what I mean?
That I really want to go to Cheltenham Literary Festival. I think every year, I think bizarrely, of course, last year was the first year I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to get tickets, and then
it was online.
The world ended.
It did, yes.
So I didn't end up going, and I always really wanted to, because especially last year I'd gotten into so many sort of more, I suppose, contemporary releases, because I am an absolute pain for not getting to books until they've been out for like 5-10 years.
That can happen. That's no bad thing.
So I just tend to just live in backlist, and I'm constantly trying to catch up. But yeah, I think definitely it's amazing when you can meet authors and sort of really pick their brains about the things that they write about. I suppose the writing process, because I mean, as not a writer myself, I find it all really fascinating.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do not know how I would react in that scenario, because I have a few friends who write and whose books that I've read, and I consider them very, very good friends. And it's kind of gone past that point where, even though I still find myself a little bit like, oh my God, you know these people in real life when I'm reading their books, it's gone past the point where I almost don't really think about it. But when I think about some of my favorite authors, I just think, oh my God, I don't think I'd be able to speak if I ever came into contact with.
It's so strange, because I know we're going off. I'll get back to the book in a minute, but
Yeah,
basically, it's all right. It's all right. That's what we're here for. I was in London for her second book launch, which was The Foundling, in February, literally just before COVID took over everything. And I walked into, it was in Daunt Books in London, so this old gorgeous building.
Yeah,
and Stacey personally invited me, and she's like, "Can you come along, because you've been such a support of the first book?" I was like, "Yes, of course." And I went, and I was in the same room with the likes of Stacey was there, Jessie Burton was there, Laura Purcell was there. There was more who I'm
your
sorry,
imaginary
guys, I can't
dinner
remember.
party just come to
Literally,
life.
but the biggest thing is, though, I couldn't say hello to Laura Purcell, because she's like myself, she's really introverted, so I didn't want to kind of throw myself at her and she'd be like, "Oh my gosh, who the hell is this person?" But I literally strolled up to Jessie Burton so casually. I might have had a few publishing wines by this point. So basically, people who go to publishing parties know this wine's usually it's usually room temperature, which it's fine, and it's usually in plastic glasses, because if you drop it, it's fine. And I literally just swagged up to her, and I was like, "Oh, hi, and before I could literally say who I was, she literally said to me, she was like, "Are you Dan the Man?" And I was like, "How do you know who I am?" Because obviously Stacey had already told, like, I think she warned everyone. I think she was literally like, "Yeah, look out for that maniac over there." And Jessie Burton was so cool, and we just stood there for because I took a friend with me who's also a bookseller, and we stood there for 15 minutes just talking about the publishing industry and Jessie's books. And Jessie Burton is without a doubt one of the cool kids at school, but she's nice about it. So she's not horrible cool, she's cool, and I think she's awesome. But anyway, back to the book. So this book, again, it's slightly earlier than the other two, so it's actually set in Lancashire in 1612. So it's around the
couple centuries earlier.
Yeah, a couple of centuries earlier. But basically, what Stacey has done is she's used a real woman. So the main protagonist of the story has the poshest name. Her name's Fleetwood Shuttleworth.
Yeah,
that's a posh name. That's a posh name. And basically, she lives with her husband Richard at Gawthorpe Hall, and again, Gawthorpe Hall is a real place. You can actually go and visit it. And the main story is she's been pregnant 3 times already, and unfortunately, she's never been able to carry a child to term. So she always goes through some sort of, she loses a child. And she's pregnant for a fourth time, and she finds a letter addressed to the husband, because obviously the woman who was actually pregnant wasn't supposed to know this information, because, you know, she's a woman, from her physician, saying if she tries to bring this fourth child to term, she will perish along with the child. Her body can't take a fourth go. So the main reason for this upset is the reason that Fleetwood is married to Richard is, again, as I said earlier about another book, she's a woman of high standing. Her only purpose in life is to be a vessel for heirs. Basically, she's got Richard loves her. Richard is a really doting husband. He's really he wants this heir, but equally he wants his wife to survive.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, in historical fiction, love, a lot of the time, love has its limits.
Yeah, a lot of the time they say, I didn't marry for love, I didn't have this family. I mean, anyone who's ever watched Bridgerton, shout out to everyone who's watched that. A lot of them are just like, you don't marry for love, you marry because you need connections, and you marry because you need to further your bloodline, so to speak. So she kind of, the best thing about this part is she kind of does freak out and run out of the house in a state. She literally just she pulls a historical fiction mighty and just runs out of the house, and she's just like, what the heck am I going to do? So she stumbles upon Alice Gray, who is on her land, who shouldn't be, and she kind of says to her, what are you doing here? They have a bit of a cross-path moment, and then Alice says to her, I can actually help you bring this child to term if you trust me. I'm a midwife.
Oh, I thought she was going to say I'm a witch, and now it's just like, no, don't trust her, don't trust her.
So basically, the main I took away from this story, the main thing is how much can you trust a person without actually knowing them too much when you're out of options. So Fleetwood takes Alice into her home, says to Richard, this is my new midwife. She will guarantee we both survive. It seems to be going well until a member of the family accuses Alice of being a witch.
Yeah, so never trust someone you cross paths with and promises you the very thing that you want more than anything in the world. Just never, just it just feels like a good rule. I mean, maybe I'm a suspicious person.
But I'm just making a deal with the devil. It's not that bad. But what Fleetwood actually does is she doesn't kind of give in and go, oh, well, okay, well, she's clearly a witch. She fights for Alice beyond just saying, well, she's a midwife. She begins to trust Alice, because what Alice does is she does make Fleetwood have hope again, and she thinks, well, everything that because the issue is if you're an apothecary or a woman of healing,
witch.
Yeah, you're basically, yes, you were, so if you could heal in the eyes of like men, you could also harm, so you were seen as a witch.
I mean, it didn't even need to be like that higher threshold back then, did it? It's like, oh, you can read and think for yourself.
You can do math. You're a witch. Yeah,
probably a witch. You can ask a question.
You're a witch. And I think the most beautiful thing about this story is the fact that Fleetwood never kind of gives up on Alice. So there's a few points where she might doubt herself, and she might be kind of like, oh, have I done the right thing? But she doesn't show this to anyone else. So whereas her husband, her family, friends, those closest to her are all doubting Alice and saying, she's a witch, she's gonna bring you down. Literally, Fleetwood is just like, no, I refuse this. She's only trying. She doesn't see why Alice would have an ulterior motive.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if that, to be fair, that's probably an argument that I've used more often than not. Isn't it? I think I'm a slightly gullible and naive person, maybe at my core. I like to believe everyone's probably got best interests at heart most of the time, but more often than not, my default argument is just like, yeah, but what do they gain from? Because I feel like there needs to be motive, there needs to be a reason, because like, who's got the time to go around ruining people's lives for absolutely no gain?
No reason. Yeah. Yeah, that is the thing. So it's kind of, but the biggest issue is it's kind of, she centered it around the Pendle witch trials because at that time they were fast approaching that area, and the king was just witch mad. He was just like, just find me witches. I don't care where you get them from.
Yeah,
which was rather unhinged.
Just a bit. I mean, which is so surprising because the British monarchy's got such a stellar track record for.
Haven't they just? Yeah, aren't they just so relatable? Like #relatable content. Just honestly,
yeah. They've definitely never done anything that's completely unreasonable ever.
No, don't be silly. Oh, no, of course not.
Well, I mean, that sounds really. I mean, another really interesting one. I mean, obviously, like you say, a little bit older, but also centering on some really important topics as well. Because I mean, I think, like you say, it's so much. Women are generally, by so many different groups, considered just vessels for carrying on the next generation,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it's something that isn't discussed, but equally, I think the difficulties around, you know, bearing and rearing
Yeah.
children are also not discussed very often, and it sounds like there's probably a good thread of, I suppose, female camaraderie. I like that the idea that she doesn't immediately throw Alice to the wolves, which would be easy for her, considering
Oh
her
yes, yeah.
particular
She
rank.
could literally just like, do you know what? Then just take her, just get her away. But she's so steadfast in the fact that Alice is just a friend trying to help, and
Yes.
Fleetwood doesn't have that many people around her that she can really call her friends. So when this woman just looks at her and goes, she doesn't want anything from her. She just wants
Mm.
wants her
Yeah,
to survive.
I say I'm gullible, but also that makes me suspicious as well.
So you're equal parts,
Yeah,
equal parts.
I'm both a
It's black
suspicious
and white there.
person and a naive person.
Yeah.
If those two things can exist hand in hand. Well, I'm not going to ask you what happens because I feel like I need to read it now because I want to
You
know
do.
what
You
happens.
do. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so we don't run the risk of any spoilers. What is the fourth book that is joining your saga of historical fiction,
So the
starring
next
amazing
one,
women from the
I was going
sounds
to
of
say,
it?
all of these I've realised as well, all literally, apart from one of them, like all the protagonists are women, and it's just like, I have no apologies because women rule, so that's the way it should be. So this next one, I had heard of this author before, but I hadn't read anything by her because she's a very well-known children's author, and this is her first foray into an adult novel. And since then, I've spoken to this author quite a lot, and she's amazing just on all fronts. Like, as an author, she's brilliant. As a human being, she's awesome. And I just think she's one of these kind of people who you just gravitate towards because she's just such a good-natured person. So my fourth choice is The Mercies by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. So this actually came into my life again shortly after I started working at Waterstones, and the publishers actually sent me a signed proof. And I was just like, this is a thing. I didn't know. So for anyone who doesn't know, Kiran actually wrote The Girl of Ink and Stars, which literally just won so many
Yes,
awards.
and it's the most gorgeous, prettiest ever kid
Is
book ever. It's so
There you
nice.
go. You see, you say that, and people know who she is. But then she's gone on to write, a few more, and she then decided to branch out into adult novels, and it really is something that, for me, stood out because, like so much historical fiction, she's taken a real event and she's fictionalized the lives around it, and it draws you back to wanting to learn more about what actually happened during the actual event itself. So the novel centers around it's set on the really small Norwegian island of Vardo, so it's a vast removal from where my other books are. So all the other books are very kind of English, Victoriana. This one takes you further back, so it's actually 1617. So again, it's slightly earlier than the Familiars. And she's taken this real storm, which to this day they say struck this boat and killed a heck of a lot of people. But the storm was unnatural for the time of year. So it was kind of like, yes, storms happen around there quite often, but this one was so cataclysmic, it almost varies on, dare I say, witchcraft.
Yeah.
Because it was so supernatural. And so what Kiran does is she opens the story on this terrible storm where all the men who are the fishers, they're, the men are obviously, they're the breadwinners, all this kind of stuff. They get taken down on this boat. And basically these women are left on this tiny island called Vardo, which is a beautiful name, to kind of fend for themselves with their children. So it starts off with very good intentions of these women going, well, we have to do what we can to survive. We have to keep each other going. But at its root, it is very much a story of how far can you really push people. And everything seems to be going not okay because, they've lost all the men, they've lost their husbands, they've lost sons, they've lost brothers. But 18 months pass, and this figure arrives onto the island, and he turns around and goes, oh, these women, they're touched by the devil. There's because there's no men.
Obviously. I mean,
Obviously.
How else would they be alive after 18 months without the intervention of men?
Without God or a man. And so he's sent there as kind of like an envoy to kind of speak back to the mainland and, tell them what's going on. And
not
finds
save
him
them or help them.
No, literally, it's well, save them with, of course, quote unquote salvation, because that will solve everything. And it's just absolutely brilliant, because this community is completely ruled by these untouchable matriarchs who have made things work. It's been hard, it's gritty, they can't even bury the bodies because the ground's frozen. It's the wrong time of year. So you've got to bury the men who they've been able to rescue. I mean, they're dead, but who they've been able to retrieve from this awful wreckage. They're having to store them for the winter before they can actually bury them.
Yeah.
I mean, how heartbreaking would that be? Yeah, absolutely traumatic. And the biggest thing for me is the fact that there's a really beautiful relationship between these women. Even when things start to break down, they realise that they might be doing this to themselves. They realise that, yes, this influence has come from the outside world to say, oh, God's not touched this place for such a long time, you need saving. But they also realise that they can save each other if they just help each other a bit more, rather than, yes, strain happens because obviously resources start to run low and tempers fray. But they've got to remember that, the men might be gone, but they need to stay strong for each other. But this outsider, he thinks he's doing help, and really he's just harming the community.
Of course he does. Men, they're always helping, aren't they?
Yes. If helping you mean hindering and making things 1,000 times worse, yes.
Sorry, we don't dislike men on the podcast.
We don't, but I am one, so I'm allowed to say this. Men, you need to up your game. Literally, simple as that.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm getting sort of not. When I sort of think of an island of women who all sort of make things work just in the way that women have a power to, I'm just sort of imagining like Themyscira, but in like a cold wilderness, as opposed to like an island paradise like Wonder Woman's island.
I mean, well, she lived on a gorgeous island. She was just like, oh, we're all scantily clad, but we're got great bodies and the sun shining all the time. This is kind of, she takes the kind of concept of women, they do rise above it, because at the end of the day, who needs a man? No one.
I mean,
true.
Have to.
Again, not a man-hating channel, but there we go. But the fact that they kind of, yes, this guy comes in and he says, you need to change your ways, etc., etc. And they all some of them are very easily swayed. Some of them are very God-fearing. They're very kind of like, oh, well, this man's here to help. But then some of them are kind of like, we don't need him. But again, that word witch starts to get thrown around, and it's not just the man that starts accusing them. It's they do. When they come to a certain breaking point, they do start to turn on each other, and it's quite heartbreaking, because there's one scene in it where I won't say anything about it, but it's just kind of, you think they're all getting along, then something happens, and you just think, how is this going to end?
The straw. Sorry, I don't know why, but when the meme, the one from Is it me? No, I don't know. It's just you don't even go here. That was just the image.
Oh, you're thinking she doesn't even go. Is it? I'm gonna say clueless. Am I going to upset loads of people if that's wrong?
Maybe it's probably me and girls.
Mean Girls.
Mean Girls.
She doesn't even go here.
I was just. I don't know why, but like when I was just imagining this guy coming onto the island, I'm like, you don't even go here.
That is literally what it is. He walks in, he's just like, oh well, I wear. I come from the house of God, so therefore, my word is law. And it's just like, some of the women are like, oh, well, maybe he's here for good intentions. But a lot of the women are just like, we don't need him.
Yeah. That's a whole vibe. That's a whole vibe.
We don't need him. And it's like, he doesn't go here. And it's just kind of, but the fact that Kiran, the way she writes, I've read quite a few of Kiran's books, and she actually has a new one out in, I think, next week, that she collaborated with a wonderful husband with. So it's her story and his artwork, and it just sounds amazing.
Oh, wow.
I think it's called Juliet and the Shark, I want to say. I hope I got that right for her sake. Mm-hmm. But she just writes wonderfully, and I have all the time in the world for her, because she's she's very open and she's very human on social media. She doesn't kind of shy away from harsh topics. She will call people out if they need to be, but at the same time, she doesn't command respect, because I think command respect makes it sound like a dictatorship, but
worthy of.
She's worthy of respect. I mean,
Yeah.
Kiran Millwood Hargrave, she's a brilliant author, and she knows how to draw you in with a story. And this book has just released about a month ago, I think, in paperback, and the first run of paperbacks we had in for Waterstones had gorgeous orange sprayed edges, and they had like flowers going down the side, and they just sold out so quick.
Yeah, I'm
and,
not. Waterstone special editions, for anybody who never bought one for some reason,
buy one.
They're worth it. They're worth it.
They are so.
Yeah, I have to avoid that section of the website a lot of the time because
signed in a special edition, you're like, oh my god, not
yeah, my absolute downfall is I will pre-order it, but if it comes below the threshold for free postage, I'll be like, well, I need to go and get another book on my wish list to top it up. Then this pre-order comes with free shipping.
It's absolutely, because I read a book recently. I'm actually reviewing it today, and it comes out on Thursday. And the Waterstones edition has got like stenciled sprayed edges, I don't think anyone else is doing it. So it's called The Winter Garden by Alexandra Bell. So it's the same Alex Bell who did Frozen Charlotte. So this is her, like, I believe this is her first foray into a full adult novel. I read it in like 24 hours. It's beautiful. Again, it's Victoriana. It's great. But if you look on the Waterstones website, there's purple sprayed edges that are stenciled all the way down the edge. And it's just like, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, the Waterstones edition of The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton with the waves on the edges. Yeah, so I have a copy that matches my Goldsboro copy of Evelyn, The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, but I'm finding it really hard to I've kind of got into this headspace where I'm like, I don't need duplicates of books because I don't have enough space.
Yeah.
But I really am finding it hard to part ways with either of these two copies because the waves on the side of it are just amazing. But yeah, definitely go check out
Waterstones edition. I mean, yeah, with the Mercies, it's stunning. So I would say, like, I think they've completely sold out the paperback now of the special edition. But Waterstones, I love the fact that they create such gorgeous copies, because it just makes it, it looks gorgeous on the shelf, but also it just makes it even more special.
And also price them completely reasonably instead of charging ridiculous premium. They're exactly the same amount as the book, the standard that is being sold. It's amazing. But yeah, so the Mercies, it sounds great, and I love when authors show that they can write for all audiences. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with people who just stay in one area, but it's really amazing when you can when authors kind of show that range between being able to write for the younger audience, older audience, everyone in between.
She's versatile. She's definitely versatile.
Yeah, versatile is the word that I was looking for. But yeah, and well, I mean, the fifth and final book that will be joining your historical fiction, amazing historical fiction recommended reading and list that you'll be taking with you to your alpine resort, which just sounds amazing because you're going to just get so cozy reading to all these books. But
with pumpkin spice latte in my hand. So
on tap, of course.
On tap. So the fifth book I have decided, and it was a kind of toss up, but I thought this one I still recommend. So this was actually recommended to me by my manager a few years ago, because he likes a bit of historical fiction as well. And when I first saw it come out in hardback, unfortunately, I was just on the cusp of probably reading too much, so I didn't pick a hardback up. I wish I had. It is the gorgeous The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower. And this book I have probably reread 4 times now. And I've also listened to the audiobook, because the audiobook is just class. The biggest thing for me in this book is a lot of people think it's fantasy or mythological because it says the word mermaid in it. It's not. It is historical fiction at its core. So it centres around a gentleman called Jonah Hancock. He is a merchant of the seas, but he does all of his seafaring from an office, and he sends his ships out to do everything for him.
Smart man.
Well, I mean, I'd be the same.
Dangerous.
Yeah, but back then, I mean, you know, it's set in 1785, so the sea was very dangerous back then. And he one day gets a rather rude knock at his door in the middle of the night, and one of his sea captains is back, and he says he's lost the ship. he's lost all the cargo, and Jonah is literally just like, right,
Then why
okay,
are you
first of
here?
all,
The
why are
captain
you
goes
here?
down with the ship.
Yeah, basically, he says that. He's just like, but what are you doing here? So basically, the captain says, I've got something even better. And he is gifted this hideous, ugly, looks from beyond another realm, something that someone says is a mermaid. So we've all seen these images online of these like apparent quote unquote mermaids, but they're usually a
P.T.
fishtail
Barnum.
with a monkey on top or something like that. But this one seems to be a mermaid, like a baby mermaid, but completely intact. They can't find any sewing seams anywhere. They can't find anything at all to say this is not 100% authentic. So the captain says to him, look, yes, I've lost your ship. Yes, I've lost all of this stuff, etc., etc. But just think of the money you could make off of this.
Yeah. See,
that was my example. I was like,
I don't know.
sure.
I don't know what Mr. Hancock's view on it, but all I'm hearing is, okay, so you've lost all of my money and my ship, and you've brought me the stolen body of some poor creature that is now dead, and you want me to exploit that instead.
Yeah.
But just give it a proper burial and go and find my ship, please.
Yeah, but it's the 1700s. They love that kind of stuff. That's the issue. It's kind of like, if you look at like P.T. Barnum, he was a monster, but he loved to exploit things like that because people... I mean, The Greatest Showman, I'm sorry, people, that's not a highly rated movie because they glamorized P.T. Barnum when he was a complete
Oh, yeah.
a-hole.
I mean, that's what happens when you cast Hugh Jackman. I mean, the soundtrack is amazing.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I love the soundtrack, but
it's
story
not
itself...
all historically accurate.
Because everyone's like, oh my God, P.T. Barnum was such a nice guy. I was like, he was horrible. He exploited human beings just literally for gain. It's an
interesting message that they've put in there with, like empowering people who are different from others. That's the message they've tried to sell with it, but it has, in the
crashed
same way,
and burned.
Well, it's the same way that Hamilton has glamorized a group of people who, they did their good things, but they did many of their bad things as well. But has completely
blindsided and just forgotten.
Glossed over that because it doesn't make a good musical, does it? So
no, but that's it. So if it's too depressing, it won't get on Broadway. So what's the point?
Yes, exactly.
Then again, Les Miserables. So basically,
Mr. Hancock.
he says, "Okay, right." So he kind of takes a punt and he sets up in a really small coffee shop in the top parlor, and he kind of just... we leave him there to kind of think, okay, am I going to find my fortune or not? So over the other side of town, there is a rather well-to-do high society woman called Angelica Neal, who she's not a doxy because doxies are too low paid and too low on the rung. She's a very high courtesan for a very... but the woman herself who actually runs the brothel is disgusting. She's a user. She is a peddler of flesh, and Angelica is her prized possession. So Angelica actually, she is the most highly desirable woman. She is the most costly woman. And then she hears of this marvel that Mr. Hancock is getting around, and she thinks, oh, I could find some money in him. But when she meets him, it's at the most ostentatious, gorgeous party, because basically the woman who owns Angelica tracks down this mermaid and Mr. Hancock hires it to her at a very high price, and she holds a party.
He's got a ship to
And when
replace.
they're there, Angelica meets Mr. Hancock because she thinks obviously she can get money out of him. And through certain events, I mean, anyone who's read the book, that party is just the most depraved, lurid. There's one point where someone's going around with a tray full of... this is awful for anyone who doesn't know historical fiction, but basically condoms, or condams as they were known back then, were soaked in milk to keep... so basically they were washed, they were reused, they were soaked in milk. So she's going around saying this is what kind of party it is. So before Jonah can get his bearings, he sees men rutting next to him and he's like, I can't do this. So through a series of events...
I mean, parties in historical fiction novels, they're either like completely tame or they're complete... there is no in between.
Orgies. There was no in between.
Yeah, there is no in between. There's no, it got a little bit wild. It
just literally, so it got wild to the point of just depravity. So basically, he, through some series of events, he loses this mermaid. I won't say how it happens. And she strikes a bargain with him by saying, I will marry you, because he becomes completely besotted with her. I will marry you if you find me another mermaid. And how's he going to do that?
Well, yeah, he didn't find the first one. I really think he should
No.
just...
So the main story is basically it's a destructive power of obsession and wanting something you can probably never have. So the biggest thing for me was, yes, it all sounds very kind of fantasy-ish and kind of like, oh, there's a mermaid involved. But the mermaid really is just like a very small scratch at the surface of how deep this novel goes, because Angelica is willing to lose her power of being a highly revered courtesan and going against what she should do. And Jonah is very willing to give her his fortune because she's literally like, oh, courtesans know how to capture a man's heart, and that's what she wants to do with him. But she wants his lifelong money. She's willing to be a wife if he can furnish her to what she has become accustomed, and then further on. But will it happen?
Yeah, that's intriguing. I mean, this setup, I suppose, for what the thing is, this quite quick to take place at the beginning of the novel, and then the rest is exploring.
It's very kind of like, I would say the first third of the novel is kind of establishing the fact that this mermaid could make him money, her fascination with getting the money off of him, and he just becomes besotted with her because she is the most beautiful creature he's ever seen.
Of course, her name's Angelica.
Angelica Neal, Angelica, of course. But the fact that he lets all of his ideals and sense go out the window, and he just gets maniacal on sending all of his other ships out to say, I need another mermaid. That's the only reason she will marry me. And the conclusion of the story really is, it's polarizing, because a lot of people I've spoke to, they either adore the ending because of how it leaves it, I won't spoil anything, or they're at war with the ending. So I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but I, for one, adored the ending because it kept it. She literally, she hasn't written anything since. She's wrote a short story for a book that comes out in October called The Haunting Season, which is a collection of short stories by people like herself, Elizabeth McNeil, Natasha Pulley, Bridget Collins,
Natasha Pulley,
Laura Purcell. So yeah, it's called The Haunting Season, and it's just like all these ghost stories coming out in October, which is brilliant because it's perfect for that time.
Yes.
But she's excellent. She's such a brilliant writer, and again, I believe The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock was her debut, and I just think I recommend it as often as I can because I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's a really great book to top off the list, because I mean, even if Angelica isn't the main viewpoint of the novel, she's definitely yet another very strong female character to add to the repertoire of female characters.
Absolutely.
We have so far. So I just a really great way of topping off the list. It's just, a lot of amazing. Am I right in thinking it's all female authors?
Yes, all female. Go me.
a lot of amazing female authors to watch, and also a lot of amazing characters to read about. So
yes,
it's all historical fiction. Is your just for the benefit of any listeners who want to maybe make a quick note or add all of them to their Waterstones shopping cart, what would you mind recapping the 5 books that you've chosen?
Yes, so you've got The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. You've got The Confessions of Frannie Langton by Sarah Collins. You have The Familiars by Stacey Halls. You've got The Mercies by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. And The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower.
Amazing. And was this a hard list for you to come to? Or...
Oh, yes. My shelves are, I would say, I was toying for about, since we last, when we set this thing up about a week ago, I've been toying. I could literally talk about so many more for days, but it's a hard list, but I think I stand by it for sure.
Definitely. Well, are there any honourable mentions that, they were really, really close, but they didn't quite make it?
I would definitely say The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. That was a complete standout debut for me. It was fantastic, and people who loved it, she announced last month there is going to be a sequel to The Miniaturist called The House of Fortune that comes out in July next year. So I'm really excited for that. And also The Binding by Bridget Collins, because everyone who I've ever spoke to loved that book. And me too, I thought it was brilliant.
I have a very attractive copy of the Goldsborough edition of The Betrayals by Bridget Collins on my shelf that I've not yet read, but it's very pretty.
It's very beautiful. Yeah, she's a fantastic writer. But I think I would also say, I'm just thinking of one more. I'm literally just like glancing on my shelves. One that I was going to put on the list, but it's not actually out until next year, so I didn't want to kind of, recommend anything that people can't get yet. But one book that I'm really excited for is Pandora by Susan Stokes Chapman. So I read that a few months ago, and again, it's Victoriana. It's beautifully written, and again, it's a strong female author. It's a strong debut, and it's the prettiest hardback proof I have ever seen, and it sits on my shelf very proudly.
Well, I mean, that's a great recommendation for people to, try and find to pre-order, or just to keep their eyes peeled for.
There will be the best thing about Pandora is as well, the cover art was done by Michaela. I can't remember her surname, she'll kill me for it, but she's done cover art for The Binding, The Betrayals, Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. So she's worked on some Ariadne is fantastic. Ariadne is so good.
It's also gorgeous, so the front beautiful. Cover of Pandora is also going to be gorgeous.
Oh, the cover of Pandora is just you look at Michaela's work and you think that's definitely her, because there was a debate on Twitter the other day about, are hardbacks worth it? Why not just bring out the paperback straight away? And I launched myself into it and said, as a bookseller and a book blogger and a book lover, nothing beats a hardback.
I love hardbacks aesthetically. There are some books that I prefer to read in paperback because I feel too scared to write in hardbacks, whereas a paperback, floppy Penguins classic paperback that I can just scribble all over. Thank you. So I love them both, and I like that people release them both. I mean, I am going to be shortly getting myself a copy of The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle in paperback, because even though I have a stunning hardback that I adore, that does not leave my house, and I want a paperback copy that I can scribble
actually go around with.
So I mean, my husband, I mentioned he really likes like crimes and mysteries and stuff, and I really want him to read The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. He goes, should I read this one? I'm like, no, you don't touch that one.
No, you leave that alone.
You stay away from that cut. That you don't touch it.
You touch it and I end you. Yeah.
Anything that has a plastic cover on this bookshelf, you don't touch.
You don't touch, basically.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, those were all, amazing historical fiction. It's definitely. It's a genre I really want to get more into, so I will definitely be making sure I keep up with your blog and reviews and that sort of thing. But if any of our listeners also want to keep up with you and see your amazing recommendations, whereabouts can they find you?
Oh, well, that's an excellent place to put it there. So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. Twitter, I am at dman1504. And Instagram, I am dantheman1504. So you see, I try to keep it same-ish, but someone beat me there to the first name, so that was a shame. And you can also find all of my reviews on waterstones.com, and they're on there as a bookseller review, so it's from me. But if not, come into my store. I work in Waterstones, Bristol, Cribs Causeway. Just pop in and say hi anytime.
Oh, I need to go to Bristol soon, so I might have to pop in and say hello.
Please do.
I will definitely put links to both those and all that in the show notes for anybody who wants to go and check them out as well and have a nice easy link. So yeah, Dan, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It's been so much fun.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a genre I don't get to talk about very often, so I'm so glad that I'm so excited that we've been able to have you here and you've been able to talk about it and talk about all these amazing books. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you again.
You're very welcome. Honestly, our pleasure. And listeners, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, bye for now.